In the quiet rolling hills of Lower Allen Township, located in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, is the Camp Hill Correctional Facility. The prison was built in 1941 as the industrial school at White Hill for young offenders. In 1975, officials determined that the facility was not a suitable place for juvenile offenders. 2 years later, in 1977, it reopened as a state correctional institute at Camp Hill, managed by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, housing adult male offenders. In late fall of 1989, the prison was managed by Superintendent Robert Freeman. Much like other prisons at the time, Camp Hill was facing a major problem with overcrowding. The prison was built to house only 1,400 inmates, but at the time was holding up to almost twice that many. In fact, 2,600 men were inmates. The facility also made a bad decision, which was mixing non-violent inmates with violent ones. There was also a militant group of inmates. The facility faced other problems like understaffing, poor construction, and lack of leadership. Additionally, inmates were very frustrated with many new policies in the institution. Families were no longer allowed to bring homemade food to inmates. The quality of the food they were being served was, in their opinion, wasn't very good. In addition to these factors, inmates realized that there was almost twice as many people in the prison as there should be. All these problems made tensions very high, and a situation was about to burst. On October 25th, it was a normal day. Around 3 p.m., inmates were being escorted from the exercise field to their cells to prepare for the evening meal, when all of a sudden, an inmate, for no apparent reason, assaulted a guard. More inmates joined in and overpowered other guards. The guards, knowing they were being attacked, locked themselves in secured areas. The inmates tore down walls and beat them and took 8 of them hostage. In minutes of the outbreak, inmates set 4 fires, destroying a food service area, the prison hospital, a gatehouse, and part of an industrial building. Inmates removed the metal covers of the boxes that controlled the locks to their cells. Some 7 hours later, around 10 p.m., a couple hundred state troopers were sent into the prison to restore peace. Their presence forced the inmates to release some of the hostages, and local police rescued the rest. There was no more rioting that night. Of the broken control panels for the cells, Superintendent Freeman spoke to 6 of the inmates who helped stop the previous night's riot to understand the grievances they had. The inmates told him about the rule not allowing their families to bring homemade food to them and not getting adequate health care. Later that day, guards informed officials that inmates might riot again because the locks to their cells were still broken. However, officials never repaired the broken cell locks. On October 26th, the day after the first riot, when correction officers were locking inmates in their cells, due to the fact that the locks were still broken, inmates were able to escape. This time, they were almost able to take control of every section of the prison within hours. They set more fires and took 5 more officers hostage. The police negotiated with the inmates over a telephone to release the hostages and stop the rioting. The inmates demanded televisions, but they did not get them. Firefighters were called in to put out the many fires, and hundreds of state police and the 5 local agencies were called in as backup. The police tried many times to get control of the prison, but were unsuccessful every time. This day of rioting followed into the next day, October 27th. On the 3rd day of the riots, state troopers stormed into the kitchen area where the most violent inmates were held up. The troopers subdued them and were able to rescue 1 hostage from an adjoining cell block. As the police were getting control of the prison, the inmates released the remaining hostages. By 9 a.m., all the inmates had surrendered to authorities. Some of the inmates were being held in the 4 cell blocks that were not destroyed by the riots, while the rest of the inmates were being held in 2 recreational fields which were surrounded by police and riot gear. After 3 days of the outburst, 123 people were injured, including firefighters, police officers, and inmates. 3 were reported in critical condition. A total of 14 buildings were destroyed at a cost of $17 million. Luckily, no one was killed. Superintendent Robert Freeman was suspended from his duties because he ignored the broken cell locks, which led to the second day of rioting. 1,200 of the 2,600 inmates were transported to other institutions because the Camp Hill facility was too damaged to properly hold all the inmates. A criminal investigation was launched and 64 inmates were criminally prosecuted and 500 received misconducts. Over the 3 days of rioting, in addition to the Department of Corrections made many security changes to prevent another event happening. Every part of the facility now has a series of fencing, in many places double sets of fencing with barbed wire. Each unit now has its own exercise field, so if any incident happens, up to 250 inmates would be confined in an area with electric fences. The facility now emphasizes on more training drills, which are done twice a month. Some of the buildings in the facility got new designs to prevent large gatherings. Police, other agencies were called to the prison for assistance as far away as Philadelphia, Reading, and Bethlehem. Technology was not that great in 1989, making managing the riot very hard. Chief Patrick O'Rourke of Derry Township, one of the agencies that responded, in an interview given in 2015, stated one of the problems was, quote, officials could not talk to each other very well because they all had different radio frequencies, end quote. He also inferred that if the riot were to occur today, police now have devices that can take radios from different police agencies and control communications through a laptop, making managing be a lot easier. This event has changed the way the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections would run their facilities for years to come. They have enhanced security and made many different building designs to keep inmate gatherings smaller. They conduct more training drills on a more regular basis. They recognize the fact that overcrowding was a major factor leading to dissatisfaction of inmates and eventually rioting. The Camp Hill prison riots will be remembered forever.